So today we are stepping directly into what I can really call a labyrinth.
Yeah, a very dense labyrinth.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But the mission for this deep dive is to deconstruct this extraordinarily dense and intensely controversial ecosystem of internet writings.
It's massive.
It is. We're looking at source material published on a blog called Barackface.
Which is quite a name.
Yeah, and specifically, we're zooming in on this intricate web of interconnected texts and book listings and embedded media that all sort of culminate around a series of posts dated March 6, 2026.
Right.
The author is Paramendra Kumar Bhagat, and he's someone who claims right at the top of the digital real estate to have been Barack Obama's first full-time volunteer in New York City.
Which sets a very specific initial expectation.
It does. But from that single, seemingly conventional political anchor point, the material just violently spirals outward. I mean, we're talking a sprawling blend of geopolitical wargaming and hyper-specific tech utopianism.
And radical exclusionary theology.
Yes, all of it. But before we take another step into that labyrinth, we really have to establish the parameters of this analysis.
We absolutely do, because the sources we are navigating today contain extreme and categorical and highly inflammatory religious and political rhetoric.
Very inflammatory.
The author makes sweeping, severe declarations regarding Islam and the nature of the Iranian regime. And he argues for the absolute necessity of a global kinetic conflict. So to you, the listener, we need to be unequivocally clear here.
Right.
We are not taking sides.
Never.
And we are certainly not endorsing any of these viewpoints. We are approaching this material strictly as an artifact of digital sociology.
Exactly. Our objective is to dissect the text.
Yeah.
We want to decode the rhetorical mechanisms the author employs and map out this idiosyncratic worldview he's constructing.
We're treating this blog as a window into how fringe unified theories of everything are built in the modern digital age.
Right. We're here to read the architecture of the building, not to move in.
I like that.
And the sheer scale of that architecture is really where we need to begin. When you first load the Barackface blog, before you even read a single sentence of those March 2026 posts, you are confronted with a massive sidebar.
It's overwhelming.
It is. It's a bibliography that spans dozens of titles across completely disparate genres.
And to put this in perspective for you, we're talking about 4.6 million page views over 2 decades.
Which isn't a weekend hobby.
No, that is a second career dedicated entirely to building an alternate reality.
And the timeline is perhaps the most crucial piece of context here. The archives date back to October 2004.
Right. You do not maintain a project of this magnitude for 22 years without a relentless, almost obsessive drive to impose your specific cognitive framework onto the world.
You really don't.
But what stands out to me isn't just the duration. It's the thematic whiplash within that bibliography. He is attempting to merge disciplines that rarely even speak the same language.
Yeah, let's look at the actual titles, because they are wild. You have what appear to be hardcore predictive technology manuals. Things like Agentic AI set to explode in 2026.
Right.
And liquid computing, the future of human-tech symbiosis.
Mm-hmm.
Then stacked immediately below those are aggressive, almost predatory economic guides.
Marketing escape velocity?
Yes, and velocity money. And the 8-step sales playbook. But then it fractures again into epic geopolitical fiction.
Like 6 weeks from zero.
Right, and the Great Subcontinent Uprising.
Yeah.
And Trump's default, the Mist of Empire.
A lot.
And finally, you hit the sprawling messianic religious texts, Kalkiism, the economic and spiritual blueprint for an age of abundance, and the last age-lord Kalki prophecy, and the final war for peace.
You really have to notice the semantic choices in those titles.
The momentum, right?
Exactly. The recurring use of words implying unstoppable momentum. Explode.
Escape velocity.
Velocity money. He is obsessed with the concept of acceleration.
Total acceleration.
When he talks about agentic AI, he isn't just talking about large language models. He's talking about artificial intelligence with agency, systems capable of taking independent action.
Right.
He is framing technology and economics and warfare not as static subjects to be studied, but as kinetic forces that are accelerating toward a specific, inescapable endpoint.
But doesn't that make the inclusion of something like frugal living tips that work incredibly jarring?
It does.
I mean, you have this grand apocalyptic march toward the final war for peace sitting right next to advice on how to save money on groceries.
It's quite the juxtaposition.
It feels less like a cohesive theory of everything and more like a chaotic collage of whatever he happened to be thinking about on a given Tuesday.
It looks chaotic on the surface, sure, but the inclusion of the mundane actually serves a very specific psychological function in manifesto writing.
How so?
Well, if a writer only operates in the stratosphere of Lord Kalki and liquid computing, they risk total alienation from the miter.
Right, you lose people.
Exactly. By grounding the periphery of his ecosystem in practical, relatable advice like sales playbooks and frugal living, he establishes a baseline of everyday competence.
Ah, I see.
He's subtly signaling to the reader that he understands how your daily economic reality works. Therefore, you can trust him when he explains the metaphysical mechanics of the universe.
It's an anchor.
It is entirely an anchor.
And that anchor is going to be necessary because the metaphysical claims he makes in the actual March 6, 2026 text, they just sever ties with conventional reality almost immediately.
They really do.
The first of the two main posts is titled, Allah is the second moon in the sky. And the thesis is entirely uncompromising.
It's aggressive.
Very. He categorizes Islam not as a flawed theology or a misinterpretation of the divine, but as a fake religion actively concocted by a literal devil. He actually writes, the devil got the atheists, but that was not enough for him.
This is a textbook delegitimization strategy pushed to its absolute logical extreme.
And again, we were just reporting what's in the text here.
Right. He isn't engaging in theological debate. He is attempting to vaporize the entire spiritual foundation of the religion. Let's deconstruct the specific metaphor he chose for the title.
The second moon.
Yes, why the second moon in the sky? Think about what a moon does. A moon reflects light. It dictates the tides. It exerts a gravitational pull on the Earth.
Right, it has real physical influence.
Exactly. By calling it a second moon, he is acknowledging the massive gravitational pull that religion has on human society. But he is asserting that it is a phantom object.
An illusion.
Right. It's a mass hallucination that throws the entire tidal rhythm of humanity out of balance.
And he compounds that with a deeply American cynical idiom, too.
Oh, the bridge.
Yes, he calls Allah the Brooklyn Bridge that the devil sold to you. He reduces an ancient global faith to a street corner con.
It's a very specific framing.
He even lists a YouTube video further down the page titled The Great Cosmic Prank Islam. He's stripping away any aura of the sacred and replacing it with the vocabulary of a grift.
Believers aren't framed as misguided seekers of truth. They are framed as gullible marks who bought a bridge they don't own.
Which brings us to the bizarre pseudoscientific theological baseline he establishes to justify this teardown.
This part is fascinating.
It is. He writes, what if I told you God created heaven and earth, and he is in the Andromeda galaxy? Right now, next year, he will be in the Milky Way galaxy.
Yeah.
Your response should be, that is not God.
This is a wild rhetorical maneuver.
Right. Why introduce astrophysics into a theological teardown? It feels completely out of left field to start mapping the creator's coordinates across the local group of galaxies.
Because he is trying to create a falsifiable, almost mechanistic set of rules for the universe. He wants to argue that true religion must align with his highly specific tech futurist logic.
Okay.
By suggesting that a God confined to a transit schedule between galaxies is absurd, he forces the reader to agree with a baseline of logical theology.
So he gets you nodding along.
Exactly. Once the reader nods along and says, yes, a God commuting from Andromeda doesn't make sense, the author immediately pivots and claims that Islam fails to meet even that basic threshold of logical coherence.
And he applies this same rigid transactional logic to historical figures as well.
Right. He categorically attempts to erase the historical narrative. He states outright, there is no historic Muhammad.
And his justification for this erasure is incredibly rigid. He argues that prophets must, by definition, produce predictive prophecies.
It's a strict criteria.
Very. Because he claims there are no such prophecies. He describes himself as a swimmer that does not swim, a runner that does not run.
It is the demand for a specific metric of validation. To the author, a religion is only valid if it operates like a machine. A prophet must produce a prophecy, much like a function must produce an output. If the output isn't there, the entity doesn't exist. He is applying the binary logic of code, true or false, 1 or 0, to centuries of complex theological history.
But to what end? Why dedicate so much digital ink to this aggressive metaphysical demolition? I mean, he clearly has a geopolitical axe to grind, so why not just start with the politics?
Because in his framework, you cannot justify the scale of the geopolitical violence he is about to propose without first removing the moral guardrails. If he admits that the religion has legitimate spiritual value, then a war against a state operating under that religion carries heavy moral ambiguity.
That makes sense.
But if he successfully frames the religion as a concoction of the devil, a scam, a second moon, a cosmic prank, then it is no longer a path to God. It becomes an instrument of pure, unadulterated tyranny.
Right.
He literally writes, "The devil's way is tyranny. Become Muslims or die. Stay Muslim or die."
That sets up a terrifyingly simple equation. If the foundation is pure tyranny, then any action taken to destroy it is inherently virtuous.
Exactly.
It's the ultimate clearing of the conscience before calling for kinetic action. But he doesn't just leave this as an abstract cosmic theory. He immediately drags it down to the street level and directly addresses the Iranian diaspora.
Yes, he references the 2 million Iranians who gathered in the cities around the world on February 14th.
And notice the immense, almost unfair burden he places on them.
It's huge.
He posits that if these diaspora members were to make the effort to achieve spiritual clarity, which in his lexicon means fully adopting his view that their ancestral religion is a demonic illusion, then so much death and destruction could have been avoided and can be avoided still.
That is a staggering rhetorical pivot.
It really is.
He goes from debating the orbital mechanics of God in the Andromeda galaxy to telling 2 million people marching in the streets that the impending death and destruction of a regional war is contingent upon their willingness to undergo a total metaphysical paradigm shift.
He's holding their political liberation hostage to his theological framework.
Exactly. He believes that political liberation is fundamentally impossible without foundational metaphysical rejection. You cannot change the government without shattering the second moon.
And this incredibly rigid linkage between the spiritual and the political is the exact bridge that leads us into the second text from March 6, 2026.
The operational blueprint.
Yes. The second post is titled, "The Just War Against the Islamic Republic, Liberation, Security, and Transition."
Right.
If the first text was the philosophical justification, this is the actual plan. According to the timeline he has constructed on this blog, he is writing as if a war against Iran is actively occurring or imminent in early 2026.
He frames this conflict as tragic and unnecessary in a perfect world, but ultimately an absolutely just war.
We need to look closely at his use of the term just war, because he is clearly trying to hijack traditional just war theory.
The established philosophical tradition.
Right, the one that dictates when military force is morally permissible. Usually that framework requires conditions like proportional response and war as an absolute last resort.
But he strips away the requirements of proportionality entirely.
Totally gone.
For him, the just war isn't about minimizing harm while achieving a strategic objective. It's about the absolute eradication of what he has already defined as a demonic system.
He outlines a three-pronged justification for this specific conflict: liberating Iranians from the most tyrannical regime on earth, eliminating the threat to neighboring states, and ensuring the survival of Israel.
Let's dig into that first prong, because he spends a significant amount of text attempting to map out the internal psychological logic of the Iranian regime.
Right. He breaks down their mechanism of control into this deadly, inescapable syllogism.
According to his analysis, the regime's operational logic dictates that citizens do not possess the right to protest.
Okay.
Therefore, the act of protesting is inherently an act of disobedience.
Right.
Disobedience against a theocratic state is categorized as apostasy, the renunciation of the faith.
And the penalty for apostasy makes the protester worthy of death.
He explicitly labels this chain of deduction the devil's logic.
But doesn't that just describe the basic mechanics of authoritarianism? Why dress it up in the language of the demonic?
Because for the author, politics and the supernatural are deeply intertwined. He isn't using the devil as a metaphor for bad governance.
He's being literal.
Yes. He tells the reader, if you want evidence that an active spiritual force of evil operates in the material world, you don't need to look for supernatural occurrences. Just look at the regime's behavior since 2009. He is literalizing the evil to justify a literal war.
And he scales that devil's logic outward to the entire region. He claims the Ayatollah doesn't view himself merely as a head of state navigating border disputes, but holds an office designed to claim all Earth.
He argues the regime treats non-warring Muslim neighbors with the exact same tyrannical logic it applies domestically.
Right, they're only granted the status of Muslim if they submit to Tehran's authority.
He is framing regional geopolitics not as a complex web of resource competition or sectarian divides or historical grievances. It's a fundamental binary clash between total obedience and total tyranny.
But the rhetoric reaches its absolute zenith when he addresses his third justification: Israel.
The rhetoric here drops any pretense of academic analysis and becomes purely existential.
He asserts that the Islamic Republic's core, publicly stated objective is not the military defeat of the Israeli army. It's not about territorial conquest or political subjugation. He claims their goal is the complete ending of Israel.
And he makes a direct, unambiguous historical parallel. He claims the Ayatollah is operating under the premise of Hitler did not finish the job, he will.
The invocation of Hitler completely short-circuits any traditional diplomatic debate. When you introduce the specter of a second Holocaust into the geopolitical equation, you are purposefully moving the conversation past containment or sanctions.
You are declaring an immediate existential emergency.
And he identifies the specific mechanism of this emergency, the nuclear program. He writes, nuclear energy is not generated a mile under the rock.
That specific phrasing, a mile under the rock, it's incredibly evocative.
It is.
He takes the reality of subterranean enrichment facilities and strips away all the diplomatic jargon. He's saying, you don't bury civilian infrastructure under a mountain, you bury a doomsday weapon.
So tying this back to his hijacked version of just war theory, the author arrives at a very stark, very binary philosophical conclusion.
What does he say?
He writes, the truly evil do not reason. The truly evil fight to the finish. At that point, the correct thing to do is to fight. It becomes a just war.
But wait, isn't there a massive contradiction here?
How so?
In his other texts, he is preaching this concept of Kelkiism as a spiritual blueprint for an age of abundance and global peace. Yet his immediate practical solution for the present moment is a devastating unilateral war. How does he reconcile a utopian vision of peace with the advocacy for mass destruction?
He reconciles it through the aesthetics of overwhelming power.
Ah.
In his framework drawn out, proportional warfare is immoral because it causes sustained suffering. He writes that the military action he envisions has been decisive and, for the most part, one-sided.
So he views a massive power imbalance as a highly ethical necessity.
Exactly. He argues that in a classic archetypal fight between pure good and pure evil, if the sides were evenly matched, the resulting attrition would destroy the region.
Therefore, a swift, overwhelming, one-sided slaughter isn't a tragic necessity. It is the most moral outcome because it collapses the evil immediately.
And to visualize that overwhelming one-sided force, we don't just have to rely on his prose. This brings us to a structural element of the blog that is genuinely disorienting.
The YouTube videos.
Yes, the posts are heavily embedded with YouTube videos from the author's own channel, a channel that at the time of this archive has 513 subscribers.
513.
He is plotting out a regional catastrophic war, and he's formatting it as a YouTube playlist.
The aesthetic of the YouTube title, functioning as a modern manifesto, is a unique byproduct of the digital age.
It really is.
You scroll down the text, and the embedded thumbnails tell a sequential story of kinetic action. You have titles like Operation Epic Fury, the 2026 Iran-U.S.-Israel conflict, and Operation Roaring Lion chronology of the U.S.-Israel-Iran war.
He is literally branding the warfare.
He moves from the broad branding into specific tactical fantasies. Videos titled Why Decapitation Strikes Could Topple Iran, and Barackface Iran-U.S. Military Buildup and Strike Strategy.
It's an entire wargaming scenario, complete with military jargon played out through the medium of amateur content creation.
The rhetorical power is in the metaphors he chooses for these video titles. Consider the title, Iran's regime is a glass giant, which he explicitly contrasts in another title with Jupiter's gas.
Let's unpack the metallurgy and chemistry of that metaphor. A glass giant implies something that is massive, terrifying, and casts a long shadow.
But the fundamental property of glass is that it is rigid and brittle. It cannot absorb impact.
Right. If you hit glass with enough targeted kinetic force to decapitation strike, it doesn't dent. It shatters entirely.
Compared to Jupiter's gas, which implies a massive gravitational pull but no solid surface to strike, a quagmire you sink into without ever hitting the core.
He is using these metaphors to convince the reader that the regime is hard but breakable while avoiding the quagmire of a ground invasion.
And his wargaming doesn't stop at the borders of Iran. He pulls the neighboring nuclear powers into his digital sandbox. There is a video titled Pakistan's Invention of Quantum Foreign Policy.
Quantum foreign policy. He just can't resist merging high-level theoretical physics with regional diplomacy.
He loves a buzzword.
But what does that actually mean in the context of this conflict? Is he just throwing tech buzzwords at a map?
It's more than a buzzword, it's a specific analytical framework. When he talks about quantum foreign policy, he is borrowing the concept of superposition from quantum mechanics.
Where a particle exists in multiple contradictory states simultaneously until it is observed.
Exactly, or forced to interact. He is suggesting that Pakistan, sitting next door to this massive regional conflict, is playing a geopolitical Schrodinger's cat.
Mm.
They are simultaneously allied and hostile, waiting for the outcome of the U.S.-Israel-Iran conflict to force their policy to collapse into a single definitive stance.
He's attempting to map subatomic behavior onto state actors.
It is a breathtaking level of detached, almost sociopathic systematization. He's essentially treating Middle Eastern geopolitics the way a fantasy author treats world-building in a novel.
He's writing the Silmarillion of neoconservative wargaming.
That's a great way to put it.
And that world-building reaches its peak when he provides his meticulous, highly specific blueprint for what happens the day after the regime shatters. He maps out an 8-week timeline for a new Iran.
This is where he attempts to insulate his theory against the crushing weight of recent history. He preemptively addresses the obvious counterarguments. He writes, I am not seeing Iraq. I am not seeing Afghanistan. Iran is different.
He is fully aware that the last 2 decades are littered with the catastrophic results of regime change and power vacuums.
Right. And to counter the fear of chaotic fallout, he presents a rigidly symmetrical schedule.
He proposes exactly 4 weeks of military kinetic action, followed immediately by exactly 4 weeks of peaceful marches and organizing.
This doesn't read like military strategy. It reads like a corporate project management sprint.
Because it is a psychological defense mechanism. Notice how he relies on that perfect symmetry. 4 weeks of destruction, 4 weeks of peace.
He is attempting to impose mathematical cognitive order on the terrifying, inherently chaotic reality of a collapsing state.
He is trying to spreadsheet a war.
He really is.
He envisions that during those initial 4 weeks of peace, a sudden, perfectly orderly political spring will occur, with political parties forming out of thin air and an interim cabinet taking shape.
And he is highly prescriptive about who holds the power during this transition. He asserts that Reza Pahlavi, the exiled crown prince, must act as an interim constitutional monarch.
Why specifically a monarch?
His rationale is that placing Pahlavi in this highly specific, culturally resonant, but constitutionally limited role provides immediate historical continuity.
Okay.
But more importantly, the author argues it prevents Pahlavi from seizing executive power as an interim president or prime minister.
He argues that keeping Pahlavi in the holding pattern of a monarch preserves the agency of the Iranian people. It allows them the option to actively choose a constitutional monarchy in a future referendum, rather than having that choice preempted by a chaotic power grab during the 8-week window.
It's an intricate constitutional balancing act constructed entirely in a blog post.
But for the actual day-to-day governing body, the interim prime minister and the cabinet, he insists they must emerge organically from the protesters inside Iran after those 4 weeks of marching.
He expects a functional government to materialize from street protests in under a month.
That is an astonishing level of optimism.
It is, but he bases that optimism on what he views as the ultimate ace in the hole, the Iranian diaspora.
Right, going back to February 14th.
Exactly. He loops back to the beginning of his thesis, referring again to those protests. He writes, what the Iranian diaspora did on February 14th, no diaspora has done ever.
He categorizes them as a historically unique group with a deep bench of talent.
His blueprint relies on a dual engine of legitimacy. The moral authority of the protesters inside the country, fueled by the administrative and technical talent of the diaspora returning from the outside.
He even admits that the political challenge of the transition are greater than the military challenges now.
He believes the military strikes will be flawless because of relentless systemic preparation.
And he's essentially throwing a plea into the digital void, hoping that political people are spreadsheeting the peace as aggressively as he is spreadsheeting the war.
Which brings us to the final unifying synthesis of this entire source material.
A big picture.
Yes. When you step back and look at the aggressive political text, the chronological YouTube timeline, the astrophysical theology, and that staggering bibliography from the sidebar, you finally see the architecture of Kalkiism.
And the author's attempt at cosmic geopolitics.
Exactly. This is the Rosetta Stone for the whole blog. Nestled right in the middle of this intense English-language geopolitical manifesto about the Middle East, there is a full translation of the post into Hindi.
Which seems completely incongruous at first.
Until you look back at his book titles. He has The Great Subcontinent Uprising and a heavy, relentless focus on Nepal and India. He even authored a book titled The 20% Growth Revolution, Nepal's Path to Prosperity Through Kalkiism.
So the Hindi translation is not an accident.
It is a broadcast signal. This isn't just a political blog written by a hawkish analyst focused on the Middle East. It is a grand, sweeping attempt to merge right-wing geopolitical hawkishness with aggressive tech futurism.
AI, liquid computing, rocketry.
All of it, and bind it all together with a highly specific syncretic religious framework aimed at the Indian subcontinent.
Let's define the scope of that syncretism. You see it perfectly encapsulated in the title of one of his embedded YouTube videos. Jews, Christians, and Hindus share one king.
He is actively trying to hotwire the eschatology of three major world religions into a single unified circuit.
And the central node of that circuit is Lord Kalki.
In Hindu tradition, Kalki is the 10th and final avatar of Vishnu, prophesied to appear at the end of the current epoch, the Kali Yuga, to destroy darkness, eradicate corruption, and usher in a new golden age.
The author has explicitly titled a book, The Last Age of War, The First Age of Peace, Lord Kalki Prophecies, and the Path to Global Redemption.
So we have to reevaluate everything we just read through this lens.
Right. When he talks about a just war against the devil's logic in Iran, he isn't just speaking in the vocabulary of modern political science or international relations.
No.
He is framing regional kinetic conflict as the inciting incident of an apocalyptic end-of-an-age prophecy.
Exactly. The geopolitical war in Iran, the explosion of agentic AI, the velocity of global economics, in his mind, these are not separate disciplines.
They are interconnected gears in the same cosmic machine, all turning toward this age of abundance promised by Kalkiism.
The over 2 decades of digital archiving, the 4.6 million page views, the dozens of books, it is an elaborate, decades-long exercise in digital world building.
He is trying to write the operating system for the apocalypse and the utopia that follows.
It is a monumental amount of information to process. We've spent this time wandering through a highly specific, passionately argued, and deeply controversial corner of the internet.
A digital space where the tactical realities of geopolitical strategy, extreme theological claims about the nature of God and Islam, and the utopian promises of quantum computing all crash into each other to form a singular, unyielding worldview.
And as we navigate out of this labyrinth, we must reiterate, while the views we've dissected today are extreme, absolute, and belong entirely to the author, examining them provides an unparalleled look into the mechanics of digital ideology.
It demonstrates how individual platforms can be utilized to construct elaborate, sweeping global narratives, attempting to tie the movements of the Andromeda Galaxy street protests in Tehran and the emergence of artificial intelligence into one cohesive, inescapable theory.
It shows the sheer, terrifying power of the human need to make patterns out of chaos, even if the patterns themselves demand destruction.
Which leaves you with a final thought to process. In an era where literally anyone can self-publish a 50-book bibliography where a person can coin their own religious movements, define new economic systems, and draft meticulous day-by-day blueprints for international wars from a blog's sidebar.
How do these intensely detailed, fringe digital manifestos ultimately influence the broader cultural or geopolitical conversation?
Do they remain trapped as sociological artifacts in the obscure corners of the internet? Or do these quantum ideas, these intense gravity-distorting personal mythologies, eventually find a way to leak into the water supply of reality?
It's a question of digital velocity.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be waiting for you the next one.